The celebration of a birthday is always an occasion for great joy. But this is not just a day to celebrate and to remember. There is a reason why we celebrate this day on a tithi, according to the lunar calendar. Because the tithi of a great soul's birth is very special. The day is special. And remembering Swamiji on this day is somehow more powerful, more memorable than on other days. It's a day when we not only honor Swamiji, but reflect on his life and teachings. The story of Swamiji's life is well known in our country, and his teachings too are available in many languages of the world. To understand Swamiji, we normally turn to his books in order to read his inspiring lectures and writings. But the teachings of great ones are only an expression of their own life, both inner and outer. Their lives, therefore, are best commentaries on their own teachings. If there's anything we are not able to understand in Swamiji's teachings, all that we need to do is to look at his life, and almost always we will find the explanation there. So reflecting on Swamiji's life is as much important as reading his lectures, and especially his early life. Swamiji, when he was a child, when he was a youth, there is a saying in the Marathi language, Balatse pai palnyat distat, which literally translated means the feet of a child are seen in the cradle. In other words, what we are going to be later on in life, oftentimes the seeds of our adult life can be found in the kind of traits, the characteristics that are seen in our younger age. Things actually don't look that remarkable when they are happening. It's only when we look back that their significance is revealed. And what significance we see depends on our interpretation, and the value on the interpretation depends on the clarity of our mind. The factual details of Swamiji's life are known to everyone, especially those who have read his life carefully. We know, for instance, that Swamiji was born on January 12th, the sacred day of Makar Sankranti, on a Monday, a few minutes before sunrise. We know also that he was born as a result of worship offered at the Vireshwar Shiva temple in Benares, and therefore he was named Vireshwar, also called Bile, when he was very young, and later came to be known as Narendranath, again literally translated meaning leader of people. An appropriate name, as we can see in retrospect, since he indeed became a true leader in the best sense of the term. Looking at his life, we see that he was not the first monk in his family. His grandfather, Durga Prasad, we read in his life, became a monk, and maybe something of those monastic traits ran through the family and were inherited by Narendranath. We also see that oftentimes we imbibe the characteristics of our parents, and we can see that in our own lives as well. In some form, often very subtle, sometimes not so subtle, the things that we do, the way we think, the way we relate with other people, the way we work, oftentimes we might be able to find seeds of that in what we have seen our father or mother doing it. And it wasn't very different in the case of Narendranath as well. His father, Vishwanath Datta, was proficient in learning, interested in music, and generous to a fault. All three of these characteristics we find in his son. It was said of Vishwanath Datta, extending charity to the poor and the distressed was like a disease with him. Vishwanath Datta used to say, "There is no need to worry about my sons. They will themselves make their own living. But these poor people have not the strength. That is why it is necessary to help them. Again, we see the kind of thinking his father had descended down into Narendranath later on. When as a young boy, Narendranath criticized his father for his extravagant charity to the undeserving, his father told him, "How can you understand the great misery of human life? When you realize it, you will sympathize with the poor creatures who try to forget their sorrow in the momentary oblivion obtained through intoxicants." This reminds us again, later on in life, his great compassion and love for the poor, the defeated, the weak. His well-known words, quoted by Swami Nityanandaji earlier, I think would bear repeating again. "May I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls, and above all, my God the wicked, my God the miserable, my God the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship." Now this is quoted very often, and we kind of understand why Swamiji would say, "My God the poor and the suffering." What I also find fascinating here, that he's not just referring to the poor and the suffering, but also my God the wicked. In another one letter to Swami Akhandananda, Swamiji says, "Murkha devo bhava, daridra devo bhava." Again, daridra deva, God in poor people, understandable. Murkha devo bhava, God in what people whom we consider stupid. Now that's something really worth thinking about, because while we have compassion for poor people, suffering people, often those who are stupid, those who become objects of ridicule, or those who are, as Swamiji says here, the wicked, become objects of hatred or anger. What Swamiji is saying is very, very fascinating. That it's not just the poor and the miserable that we should see God into, but even those who are murkha, who are stupid, those who are wicked. In other words, it's somewhat easy to see God in the poor and the suffering. Our compassion makes us to do so. It's not so easy to try to see God in those whom we consider as fools or those whom we consider as wicked. And what Swamiji seems to be suggesting is, if we can truly make an effort to see God in even those who are objects of ridicule, who are objects of hatred, we might be able to find some constructive ways of dealing with these members who are very much a part of every society. One other teaching that Swamiji learned from his father was about good manners, and he said his father taught him, never show surprise. This is another one great teaching, and we see in Swamiji's life. In his wandering days, he lived with the poor in the huts of the poor, and he lived with the kings in the palaces. He has seen just extremes of human existence. He could always maintain that calmness, that compassion, that just remaining grounded no matter what the situation of life he was facing. So never show surprise, I think, is a very, very practical and also very deep advice which Swamiji imbibed from his father. About his mother, we read in his life, his mother was deeply religious, good memory. She taught Narendra the stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata. We see that again in Swamiji's writings and lectures. He often quotes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the great characters that inspired him, many of which for the first time in his life as a child he had learned from his mother. And again, some of these things are well known to all the readers of Swamiji's life. His mother Swami Narendra was so naughty that his mother used to say, "I prayed to Shiva for a son and he sent me one of his demons." And then she later found an easy way to quiet the son. She would pour cold water on his head and calm him down. "Shiva won't take you back if you don't behave." And that would somehow calm down the little boy. And Swamiji said later on, that the thought that was constantly on his mind was, not this time again. Again, in one form or other, this emphasis, this teaching occurs in Swamiji's lectures and writings later on as well, especially when he's speaking about the goal of human life, that we need to be free if we don't want to keep repeating, go round and round in the cycle of relative existence of samsara. But if we mess it up, if we don't live the way we ought to, then we are going to have to repeat the whole thing again. And I think for spiritual seekers, this is a great reminder. When we find our life is going astray, when we are not doing what we ought to be doing, it might be very helpful to just remind ourselves and say, not this time again. His mother said, when she heard once, Narendra said, I think I have been a sadhu once. Will Shiva allow me to go back if I am good? Again, we see that later on, Swamiji's great teachings on renunciation circle around this sentiment, that this feeling that he imbibed in his young age. He learned from his mother. His mother told him, remain pure all your life. Guard your own honor and never transgress the honor of others. Be very tranquil, but when necessary, harden your heart. Again, all of these things, the teachings that he got from his mother, we find had become a part of Swamiji's character. And no wonder then, Swamiji later on declared, I am indebted to my mother for the flowering of my knowledge. In Swamiji's childhood again, we see him, we read in his life, playing at meditation. Now, children play. What kind of things we play with often determine, not always, but often determine what kind of things we like. And these often then show itself in the kind of career choices we make when we grow up. And we see that in Swamiji's life, he would emerge in meditation, even when he was so apparently playing at meditation. Once we read that there was a snake in the room, his friends ran away and called out to him, but Narendra remained motionless, unaware of the external world. And we later on, when he grew up, of course, when he went to Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna said that he is adept at meditation right from his time he was born. And these are the kind of instances we read when it's easy to see how that adeptness of meditation was revealed in his life. He once asked his school friend whether he saw light between his eyebrows. When the friend said no, Naren advised him, try to remember, do not fall into sleep as soon as you go to bed. Be on the alert for a while and you will see it. He thought it was something natural for everybody. Years later, when he went to Thakur, he was asked the same question, and only then Naren realized that it was something special. That's one interesting thing. People who are really special don't see themselves as special. So if anytime any of us think we are special, we can be very sure we are not special. We see again in Swamiji's life that his generosity, he is giving away things to mendicants and to beggars who came. And such was just like his father. And because he would keep on giving it, finally they had to lock him up in a room, in which case then he started throwing things out from the window. Very difficult to repress such a powerful child. One other thing we see in Swamiji's young age was he said his first ambition was to be a coachman. And then later on, he didn't remain as a coachman, of course. His ideals evolved. And we see, as our own ideas and ideals evolve, our ideas regarding God evolve as well. Swamiji in his Jnana Yoga lectures, the evolution of the ideal of God, says how we see God, how we understand life, how we understand ourselves evolves as we evolve. Then there is the story about the hookahs in his father's office. They had several different hookahs meant for people of different castes. And then young Narendra goes and tries every one of them. And then when he was asked, he said, I wanted to know what's so special about what would happen if I if I try out these different hookahs meant for different people? Again, a small incident, but what it shows is that spirit of critical inquiry. Again, a characteristic in a very seed form seen in his childhood, which later on became such a powerful part of his personality. There's also this one instance we see, Narendranath as a child. He saved a little boy from a horse carriage, which was kind of hurrying down wildly at a fair. And Narendra was barely said to be only 6 years old. Again, we see that helping others unselfishly, without thinking of one's own, calculating one's own self-interest, we find this characteristic in Narendranath right at the age of 6. And then, of course, when he became a teenager, when he grew up, in his late teens, we find that very well-known incident of Narendranath going and approaching different leaders, religious leaders, and asking them the question, have you seen God? And then it's only when he went to Sri Ramakrishna that he got the answer that he was seeking. And that answer that he got from Sri Ramakrishna became the foundation, so to speak, of Swamiji's philosophy. Later on in his life, we see in his lectures, in his writings, in his conversations, how often he emphasizes the idea that religion is not just about believing in something. It's not just about having faith. One of the challenges is, of course, religions are often called as faiths, as if to say, and faith is often thought to be blind. Faith is thought to be something which can't be proved, something which has no grounding in logic or a rationality. What Swamiji showed was that yes, faith is important. Faith in God is important, but he also said, first have faith in yourself and then in God. Because if we don't have faith in ourselves, our faith in God is not of much value. So the idea that religion is primarily realization. Religion is not just about believing in something, but actually experiencing the truth. It's not about reading books. Books, there are plenty. But we can keep on reading books, we can keep on arguing all our lives, and yet we may not have developed spiritually at all. I remember an incident years ago when I was a novice at the Bombay Ashrama. One of my first duties was to take care of our book sales, our book showroom. And he was this one middle-aged man who would come every Sunday and buy a bunch of books. I saw him doing it for a few weeks. And then I gathered up, I was a very young brahmachari then. I gathered up enough courage then to ask that man, do you really read all these books? Because he's really taking quite a lot of books every Sunday. And then I asked him, do you really read them? And this man was very sincere. So he said, Maharaj, when I first started buying books, it was with the intention of reading them. Later on I found I'm just collecting books and not able to really read them. So I have decided, in this life, I'll only buy books. In next life, I will read it. Now, that doesn't help. So it's not about reading books. It's not even about attending lectures. All that we need is, again, I'm reminded of Swamiji's words. Take up one idea, make that one idea your life. Think of it, dream of it, live on that idea. There's this one other quote of Swamiji, a favorite of mine. He says, live for an ideal. And that one ideal alone, let it be so grand, so great, that there may be nothing else left in the mind. No place for anything else, no time for anything else. How lucky, how fortunate we will be if we can have one such goal, one such ideal. And for a spiritual seeker, attaining God, seeing God, the kind of question that Narendranath asked every religious teacher. Have you seen God? So for a spiritual seeker, what ideal, what goal could be higher than that I want to see God? So this idea that religion is primarily an experience. It's not about talking, it's not about reading, it's actually experiencing, seeing God in the heart. That idea, again, we see the kind of questions Swamiji asked as a young man and the kind of reflection and meditation that went within him flowered and became the cornerstone of his philosophy. Many such instances can be given, but I think what some of these instances that I have mentioned are enough to show that the influences that we accumulate as children, as youth, are consciously or unconsciously internalized within us, and they make us who we are. And so it's very important, even as we try to understand Swamiji, look at his youth and his childhood, that it's helpful for us to look at our youth and our childhood and see how what we are today is in a great measure the kind of influences that we have received right from the time we are born. We are often asked about the relevance of Swami Vivekananda, of Swamiji. Clearly, he wasn't born yesterday. He had Mahasamadhi in 1902. That's more than 100 years ago. So how relevant can a person be who is now separated from us by more than a century? Within this last century, society has changed a lot. And some of Swamiji's teachings related, for instance, to the British rule in India and to the technology of his own times have a historical value, but may no longer be relevant as far as the facts go. But a lot today, 100 years is nothing in the life of a civilization, of a nation, of the world actually. So a lot has remained unchanged. The selfishness in the human heart, the jealousies, the greed for power, wealth, pleasure, and most of Swamiji's teachings deal with these unchanged realities in our society and in our own hearts. That is why the study of his life and teachings can be a life-changing experience. It's already been a life-changing experience for many of us here. Many of the monks of the Ramakrishna Order have begun their life being inspired by Swamiji's books. Many of the devotees who first came and took religious life, spiritual life seriously, for many of them, it was Swamiji's life, Swamiji's personality that was inspiring. So in some way, to a lesser or greater degree, his life and teachings have already been a life-changing experience for many of us. And if you can hold on to it, not let go, we will find it will keep on changing our life for the better. And our hearts have been touched by Swamiji, and for many of us, they have been changed forever. All we need to do now is to remain immersed in his great life, in his great words, and most of all, in his great love and grace. On this holy day, may his life and his teachings inspire us and fill our hearts with greater strength, greater love, greater grace, and greater wisdom. Om.